Hey guys, Daniel James here, and today we're going to be doing the TADay show, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with the TADay show, the way that works is we have a few music-related topics that we're going to discuss throughout the show with our live chat room, who you can see posting down here. Now, the way this works is I will throw out some opinions, I will throw out some devil's advocate-like questions, basically just trying to get my chat room riled up. And then what I'll do is I'll go over to Discord and we can drag some members of the chat room into the show live to be able to voice their opinions on the stream and, have their voices heard. They can disagree with me. They can ask me questions. Basically, it's very freeform. It's just, it's an old show. We're bringing it back. And so I guess this is season 2. We only did 3 episodes in season 1. But here we go. So anyway, today's topic, the first topic of the day, what is next for music sampling? All right, what do we got here? So, what is next for music sampling? Now, this is going to be a very vague question. This is intentionally vague. This leaves a lot of room for people to kind of interpret the question how they want. But the way that I'm going to interpret it is so when it says what's new for sampling, this was a question. I forget who asked this question. So if you're in the chat room, let us know. I think it was on Twitter, actually. But anyway, what's next for sampling? So for sampling, I feel like this question would also cover sample developers. Like, what's next for sample developers? Because when you say what's next for sampling, that's a very specific type of statement, like what's next for the actual sampling of instruments. So if we're going down that road, you know what I mean? We're going to be looking at new microphones. We're going to be looking at new microphone techniques. And this is where companies who record a lot of orchestral instruments, I'm curious to see what technological advancements they're going to be getting. It has to be microphone preamp technology. I wonder, okay, so, we've got companies like Spitfire, Cinesamples, Orchestral Tools, East West, Adio, companies that are recording organic instruments. I feel like to a point we've probably reached, not saturation point, but I feel like there's not many techniques or secret ways of recording that are still left to go from like history. I feel like as a point we've recorded them. You know what I mean? So whenever you hear something like, they recorded Motown with 2 drum kits, Hans Zimmer will go away and record 10, or if, someone's sampled their synths back into the room to get reverb, someone's gone up to the top of a fucking mountain. Like I don't think there's any sampling principle that has been done in the past that has been yet to be outdone numerically or by how big it is, how many players or how many microphones or putting a microphone in a bottle. There's so many recording techniques that like we're getting down to the niche stuff that doesn't really help. So I feel like in terms of the literal sampling, I feel like it's going to take some sort of technological advancement that we don't know yet. So like, I know that sounds like a cop-out, but look at it like this way. So in the 80s, for example, they didn't have mobile phones. You know what I mean? You couldn't just go out and record like a video of a person or something. So I feel like it's going to be like an iPhone level innovation, but in something to do with recording. So microphones, perhaps. But then what would you want more from a microphone? Like I'm kind of figuring this out with you guys. What would you want more from a microphone? I mean, it already captures the live sound. So perhaps binaural in all microphones, binaural through speakers. Because binaural tends to work with headphones. Perhaps real 3D imaging with 2 speakers. I feel like that could be a pretty good technological advancement because, headphones works because we have 2 ears. So it's like it works the same way as VR works. You know what I mean? If you cover up the entire peripheral of a sense and then replace it with something else, it's easy to believe. That's why binaural audio works with headphones, because it's like putting sound over your head. Well, that is exactly what it is. You're putting sound over your head, and then they're just replacing the actual sound with what it would sound like if you were in this different environment. So perhaps some sort of microphone that can record binaurally, but like with speakers. I don't know if that's even a thing, but they've managed to make 3D that doesn't use 3D glasses now, for example. So like, the audio equivalent of that. Preamps and stuff, you see, that's the thing with audio. Like, so perhaps something like Gullfoss. I would like to see that. What do you guys think? Something like Gullfoss, right? So one thing that happens when you are recording samples is you're recording individual instruments, right? And what tends to happen? So look at it this way. If you've got an instrument, let's say a violin, right? And you're recording every note of the violin. When you record a single note of a violin, you record the violin and you record the sound of the room and you record the sound of the violin in that room. They're the three things you're recording at all times, right? If you record three, let's say you've got a triad, right? A chord playing in the hall on strings, and you have three players live in the room play it, you'll have three players, the room, and three players playing in the room. That's what you record. Whereas in sampling, what you do is you record one note at a time, right? So you record C, then C sharp, then D sharp, then E, then F sharp, right? You record those. But what happens when you do that is you record the C, the room, and the C in the room. And now let's say you wanted to play a C major chord. If you were recording it together, you would have all three of them together, the room, and them three in the room. If you record it with samples, you end up with C, the room, and C in the room. You end up with E, the room, and E in the room. And you end up with G, the room, and G in the room. And so because the room is identical between the three, the room is going to be three times louder. And because, well, it's going to be, there's going to be three versions of it stacked on top. And so any hiss, any kind of like resonant kind of just echoey frequencies that are in that room are going to be doubled, and they're going to keep stacking. And that's why that's why when you hear a company record, like Cinesamples did one, Layers by Orchestral Tools is the same. When you hear a section recording a chord or something along those lines in a hall together, and then you use the same sample library but the individual elements, you'll hear how different and how much more realistic than playing in chords actually sounds. So perhaps we need to work down this way somewhere. It's like how I'm sure some of my chat room have done stems before. Sometimes when you render stems for someone, you want to have, okay, let's say you've got a compressor on your master channel, right? If you send everything together, like so the full mix, so the strings, the brass, the percussion, blah, 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 into the compressor, they're all going to get compressed, but they'll be compressed as one thing. Now, what happens if you want, when you render the stems out, so you're rendering one channel at a time, what happens when you want the person on the other side to, when they put the track back together, to have the exact thing they heard when you render out? It wouldn't work, because if you send an individual track through that same compressor, it's going to be triggering differently than if everything's together. So you want a way to come after the fact and render out those stems post fader, but as individual elements. You want to be able to do the similar thing with sampling. So record all of the things in the room. And I don't know how you would do this. I'm trying to come up with some sort of system that would work. So you have everybody recording the chord so that the air movement in the hall is correct, but it's only applied to each individual sample. So you would have to invent a way to cancel out the sound of other instruments while recording yours and keeping the sound of the room. Maybe impossible, but then that would be the same as what I'm talking about with compression on the master channel. You see, because let's say, for example, you're sending your whole mix through and you've got a kick drum that's got a fuck ton of bass, boom, boom. Every time that kick drum's kicking in, it's going to turn on the compressor. And if you've got strings going through, the strings will be pulled down with the kick drum. If you're sending individual elements, so if you just send the strings through, the kick isn't triggering the compressor. So the strings might go through without being compressed at all. So when the client gets all the stems back, the strings won't be ducking like they are in your thing because he hasn't got the master channel set up the same way, right? That's what I mean. We need something like that on the recording end. We need something that allows them to record the orchestra together, but you can sample the individual sections separate. That way, the air in the room is moved correctly for the eventuality of everybody playing together. Because that is important. Go listen to a brass instrument playing in an anatomic chamber, in a chamber with no echo. It's just flat and farty. Then go listen to a French horn, just a solo French horn or whatever, playing in a scoring stage by themselves, like Sony, Air, whatever it is, by itself. Listen to how grand and how epic that sounds. And the reason that is because the room is the majority of a brass instrument. Strings do create a nice sound without a room, but you put them in a room, the room is half the sound. And that's what I'm saying. So the way sampling works now is when you record individual samples, you're snapshotting that room every single time. So the more notes you play that were recorded in that same room, that snapshot of that room is just going to keep getting stacked. And let's say so again, for another explanation. So you've got a brass player, right? They play, bam, the sound waves come out like this and they go out towards the wall and then they bounce back, right? If you have two brass players, the sound comes out them both. And then when they collide in the middle, they interact and then that creates a load of new directions. That's why two brass players playing together in a room sounds different than two solo patches played at the same time. Because the actual, imagine it again, I'm trying to think of lots of visual representations. Imagine like you drop a stone in the water. All the ripples are just going to go cleanly away from the rock, right? If you drop two rocks in the water, the ripples, when they meet each other, will create turbulence in the middle. And that will create lots of little microwaves, lots of little waves, and they'll go off in different directions. That's exactly how sound works. It's just waves like that. So if you have two things playing together, they create turbulence in the middle, which will create more of a different, it'll create more of an airy sound, but it will also push the sound of the horn in different directions, which will utilize different elements of the acoustic space in which it's in. That's why, for example, you can put your phone in your mouth over the speaker and go, wow, 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 and it changes the sound. Or you can put your phone in a bowl and it appears louder because it's utilizing more of the actual space to create the resonant tones and create the, those kinds of things. So if it was me, that's where I would be looking for the innovation. I would be looking for ways, and again, to this day, that is still one of the things that differentiate live playing from samples, is that natural room feeling. I feel like there's an algorithmic way of figuring out how that's going to work. So, someone will figure it out eventually, and I can't wait to see who gets there first. There has to be an algorithmic mathematical way of working it out. You just have to make sure that it is acoustically representing the way air would travel and then the turbulence in between the two. But anyway, that's if we're just talking about the literal understanding of the word sampling. I think it means sample developers. So I think we could also apply this to user interfaces. We can apply this to programming. And what's next? I feel like AI is about to start working its way into sampling. I feel like there's people looking into that. Sorry, my dog's getting excited by a car outside. So we're just going to ignore that. But I feel like AI is probably what's coming next. So we'll have not AI replacements, but AI assistance. So when you're sampling, imagine, for example, we've already had it, but I feel like we're going to improve on it. So imagine instead of having to change articulations, imagine instead of having to, do CC numbers or play harder, imagine if AI could just look at what you're writing and make a good guess at how you want it played. And then after the fact, you adjust it. Ginger, calm. Breathe, dog. Breathe. So yeah, AI is AI assistant. So imagine you're playing. Sorry, my dog was going crazy. I had to deal with that. So you're playing, and then the AI will read what you've written. It'll read the MIDI lengths. It'll read this does already exist. It'll read the MIDI lengths. It'll read the, perhaps it could even read the type of music written around it. And then it will choose the articulation based on all those factors. What do you think? Do you feel like that's a potential? I feel like that's probably going to be the future. Other than that, I feel like you'll still get some innovations on the way that samples are streamed. I still think you'll get innovations on the way that you... like the way that we are compressing samples, the way that we're copy protecting them. But I don't really see that as like innovation for the composer. Things I see, like I want to hear what you guys think. What do you? In fact, this would be a brilliant time to take it over to the room. So let's see if these guys are ready. Let's see if these, because he helped us in training. Let's bring in Halvard. So Halvard, hello, can you hear me? You are live on the stream.
I can, and you fucking scared me. I gotta turn my shit down.
I fucking scared you. Okay, yeah. So that is a pre-warning that if I pull you into the room, you'll just hear me talking straight away. So I may be loud, I may be quiet. You never know. But Halvard, how are you doing today?
Almost got that. I'm good.
Thank you for calling into the stream. So Halvard, what is next for sampling? I mean, you can answer the literal question, like sampling as in actual recording the instruments, or if you choose, you can talk about sample developers and innovations in things like playability. But where do you see it going next? What do you think about what I said? Do you see it going something to do with acoustics, or do you see a completely new world?
I see us needing a hell of a lot of digital space.
a lot of digital space.
Not exactly digital space, but like memory and stuff. Because I did some maths, and this is gonna knock your world old.
It's going to knock my world. I'm up for it. Do it. Rock my world, Harvard.
Let's say you were a sample.
Yep.
For example, first violin. Playing some sort of articulation, for example, staccato, forte, just plain old.
Yeah.
If you were to record every eventuality on, for example, an 88 key piano,
Yep.
for an example, that would be 2 to the power of 88.
Did you do the math?
Right? I did the math.
Okay.
And let's just say that one key equals 1 bit. Right?
Yeah.
Not 1 byte, but just 1 bit.
Okay.
For simplicity's sake. That would, and I'm not going to try to read this number. I can put it in chat.
Okay.
Boom.
It's a big old
That
number.
would be the number of bits you would need.
Okay. 3.9.
So as a comparison,
Okay.
that's the number of terabytes.
How many terabytes is that?
That is 3.6028 blah 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 blah. 3 with a bunch of zeros behind it.
Right.
Until both me and you are dead.
So why do we need? Sorry, explain to me again why the data is going to be that large.
Well, that's the thing. It might not have to be.
Okay.
Algorithmic stuff, right?
Yeah. Because I mean, for example, we had the Spitfire piano, the Hans Zimmer one. That's the biggest one I've ever seen. Wasn't that like? How big was that? It was like 200 gigs or something, right?
Yeah.
But what do you like? That's what I mean, Harvard. So yeah, we're going to need a lot of digital space. But is that what you mean? That's what's next for sampling. So you think they're just going to sample deeper? They're just going to keep going down, like with MIDI 2.0, for example. It sounds like we're going to be getting more than 127 dynamic layers. So is that where you see it going? You see like just a more detailed sampling?
I think they're gonna want to do it, but I think technology gives a hard ass no.
Well, that's what I mean though. Like, because right now, obviously a hard ass no, but that's what I mean when I say like an iPhone innovation. Before we had the iPhone, imagine everything you take for granted on your phone now, being able to message someone and email and, call and go on the internet and play games. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's an innovation that even a year before the iPhone came out, you'd have been like, that's never going to happen. Like, we can't do that because that doesn't exist. Then they made it. And then everybody's like, oh yeah, I get it now. Right. That's what I'm saying. So like, can you see or like, can you imagine any that you would want musical innovations or sampling innovations that would make your life as a composer better? So more data. What about faster data? So not faster data. What about new compression algorithms, perhaps? You know what I mean? Like, so like, for example, right now it may be that much data, but what if they find a way to transmit that data over light stream, for example? So all they need to do is flash, light for 2 seconds and all that data is gone, And so what would it matter then at that point, But anyway, thank you for calling in. We will move on. But is there anything you'd like to say? You can call in again. We have got multiple topics today. Is there anything you'd like to say to chat later before we move on?
Thanks for having me. Don't kill yourself. Don't die by what.
Will do. Everybody, please say thank you to Harvard in the chat room. So yeah, so Harvard's brought in the data issue. So if we do end up sampling deeper, we must go deeper. Then we're going to end up with data through the roof. I mean, look at what we've had. How big was JXL Brass? It was like over 0.5 terabyte, right? Was it 300 gig? I forget. Like, I know the BBC was a big one as well. Like, we are getting to that point. Every few years, we end up at this moment where all of a sudden penis size matters again. Or not penis size, but like size matters again. It's comparing size. Like the biggest, what would you say? Not the biggest person, the biggest company. There we go. To do this back in the day was ADO. You know what I mean? Like over so many gigabytes of samples. Now we're almost at like over 1 terabyte of samples for a solo violin. You know what I mean? Like it's getting to that point with some companies. and particularly Spitfire and orchestral tools, it's like they're having a size-off to see who can create the largest sample library for the least amount of instruments. Like, and there's nothing wrong. Like, if you've got lots of instruments, it makes sense to have a huge install. But it's like the BBC, for example. If the BBC SO was like all amazing, like if it was all as good as their flagship products, right? Then I think the price, the install size would be cool. But like, because a lot of the instruments are just kind of meh, and I'm not going to use, I prefer something along the lines. I actually think that's an innovation, like in the Sign player, you know, being able to download just the things you want. I think we need more of that in the industry, particularly. I don't know if that's next for some. In fact, that may actually be literally what's next. Like integrated, or no, a la carte purchasing. I feel like that may actually be next. Let me put that question to the next person. So Andrew, let's bring Andrew in. So Andrew, you are now in the chat room. Let me know if you can hear me, sir, and if you're willing to talk. Are you there, Andrew?
I kind of can't hear you.
You kind of can't hear me.
I don't know what's up.
Can you turn me up? And let me see if I can turn me up. User settings. Right. Let me find my microphone.
I can only hear you through the radar.
Through one of your speakers?
No, you're.
Can you? Was I quiet for Halvard? Can the chat room hear me okay?
No, I can only hear you through the stream, not in Discord. I don't know what's up.
You might have your audio room set up incorrectly. Halvard, could you hear me through Discord or? But anyway, Andrew, we can hear you. So tell us, what do you think's next for sampling? We'll just give him a minute.
So I think your point of like AI and all the programming moving way deeper into this industry. I think something like Bohemian cello and violin, like more playability and more, and of course more AI. And I actually talked around 1 month ago with also with Tego and some other on another server. We talked about virtual modeling of instruments. Someone actually posted a very nice video by Microsoft where they actually modeled brass and woodwind instruments and then actually let them play, and it sounded actually pretty okay for everything being synthesized. So I guess that's something where this will maybe move. And yeah, of course, like stuff like orchestral tools with Sign did now, like you get the better performance, better usability. And I really hope for features like you already said, being more composer focused.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree with you. Physical modeling, I think that's what you were talking about, right? Physical modeling, like, what's the horns? There's some physically modeled horns that a lot of people use. But yeah, if that would be very interesting. So let's say particularly nowadays we've got AI and computers are super fast, so algorithmic instruments isn't actually that far off. I mean, imagine if you could create you don't have to imagine, I'm sure you can. Imagine you can create like the mathematics for all of the, like a French horn section playing in a room with the proper reverb, bouncing around, mathematically correct. And not only that, the AI is perhaps controlling individual players within that to give them, humanization, to help them phrase words correctly. So if you put like a melodic line, maybe it can look through the history of recordings and see how lines in this fashion are usually phrased. Or perhaps you can use the AI, you can have the AI listen to a load of classical music, and maybe it goes through and you can tag like little phrases that instruments do. Let's say a violin plays something a certain way. You could call that a whimsical playing style, or you could call that an emotional playing style. And then what perhaps maybe you could do is particularly if it's physically modeled, it's just changing the maths. It's a very complex maths, but changing the maths. And then you could select from a drop-down list, play this line particularly emotionally. And what the AI could do is listen to violin players playing a line emotionally and apply that same kind of structure to the line. Perhaps something like that would be cool. That's physical modeling. And I definitely think that there is an entire world that is not being explored there. I feel like because samples currently have the technology down and physical modeling is almost there, but it's, you know what I mean? Like it needs a lot of work to make it sound like it's natural. But when it does, it sounds great. So it's there. But I agree. I feel like that could be what's next for sampling. So Andrew, I know there's a delay between when you hear me talk and when you speak. So I'm gonna move you back into the queue for questions. But thank you so much for offering that insight into us. Everybody say thank you to Andrew for joining in today. Give him a clapper or a well done or a thanks or whatever it is, however you want to show your gratitude. So physical modeling. I'm actually going to write that down. That's a particularly good way of putting it. So what do you guys think about physical modeling? Physical modeling. Do any of you have any comments on physical modeling? Join the chat room right now. The Discord link down below. Someone in chat room could just post a link to the Discord. If you've got something to add in that regard, that would be interesting to hear. So yeah, algorithmic instruments, like, are they the future? Let's pull in someone else and ask. Right. Hello, Alfie. You are now live on the stream. Can you hear me speaking?
I can, loud and clear.
Loud and clear. Okay, so it isn't me. It was just Andrew's headset. I'm not sure why it was set up. So, Alfie, what's next for sampling? Is it algorithmic instruments? Is it virtual instruments? Is it sampling? Is it new techniques? What is it?
It's funny. My head went in the completely different direction, and maybe I don't have the imagination to think of all the complex ways we can improve these big budget kind of productions like East West and Spitfire and stuff. And I got thinking, well, recently Spitfire do have another kind of facet to particularly their marketing, which is they embrace the imperfect, and it's a trend I think we've seen more recently.
Yeah.
Of there's a certain kind of exoticness to, I just sampled this kind of busted my grandma's piano and it's missing some keys, and it's so and I thought, well, maybe hopefully anyway we'll see some more kind of indie sampling developments in the future.
I agree.
Kind of where my mind went.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've got in trouble for that before because that's actually the reason why I was down on the Spitfire Labs at the time because they're giving away so many instruments for free and I wanted little developers to come through and do it themselves, in unique ways. Something along, I don't know if you know this story. It's from hearsay. But imperfections is very true. And I know this isn't exactly what you said, but I don't know if you remember this back in the day. There used to be a forum called the Northern Sounds. And there was this big debate about going over whether samples should be perfect or imperfect. And at the time, it was the way you record them. Do you record them dry and add reverb, or do you record them with the imperfections of the hall that you're in, right? And if I remember correctly, it was Garritan. Do you know Garritan? This guy was saying that it needs to be recorded dry and as perfect as possible, and then you can add reverb later. And I forget the guy's name. I think it's Tobias. But this dude was like, no, you've got to record the hall. And everybody was giving him shit. So the dude literally just went away, recorded an entire percussion library in a church, and gave it away for free. And it's one of the best sounding percussion libraries in history. And
wow.
It just, you know what I mean? It was just like one of those perfect, like, imperfections in samples are important. Boom, fuck off. Like, that's what the guy did. One of my favorite moments. So you would rather see, so you think the next thing for sampling isn't the big production libraries? You think it's going to be more of an, like, move to an independent people trying things that haven't been done? Because if the point you're making there, which I agree with, which I'm putting words in your mouth, is that perhaps we have enough orchestral samples, but it's like there's options now. You know what I mean? Spitfire have like 28 of their own string libraries. There's Cinesamples, there's orchestral tools, there's ADO, there's Audio Imperia, and they're all putting out full orchestral sections. So it's already been done to death. So for you, sampling is more about the unique, the the thrifty, the things people haven't done at all. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. Yeah, I'm hoping that. I mean, obviously, those big established brands are always going to be there, and
Oh, yeah.
so long as they have the budgets, they're going to remain there. It seems like there's that barrier to entry that an indie development company just simply can't match. And if it's anything like the actual music industry, if it's anything like music, then I'm hoping we'll see. More creative. Like that lack of budget, perhaps, is driving the creativity and the kind of
for sure.
uniqueness, I'm hoping.
And you say the lack of budgets, which I being someone who started with zero budget and runs a sample library development company, well, ish. You know what I mean? Like there is a definite creativity in having nothing to go with. But like I'm more interested. You said so the big companies have the budgets, so they're always just going to go and sample. But what do you see them sampling? You know what I mean? Because like the little guys are. The little guys will always just do the things that you can only record. That's why we did hybrid, because there was a demand for hybrid and I can do it. But like that's something that you can do without a budget, like just a microphone and a computer and you're good to go. But like the budgets with the big companies, where do you see them taking those budgets? Do you see them just continually recording orchestra, because they're going to be recording something, you know what I mean? Like I understand what you mean is that like you would like to see more of the smaller companies, but if these big companies have still got the budgets, where do you think that's going? What is the future of those budgets?
So something that's I've noticed quite recently in so I play guitar and I use a lot of drums, like traditional like drum kit, drum sample libraries. And what we've seen is a sample library being produced alongside an album.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, you like the album? Well, we recorded the same drums in the same room here. And I imagine you could probably do something with movies or something else. It's like, oh, you like the new Batman orchestra? Well, here it is,
I do wonder though. Like, imagine you've just written your score, right? And it's a really creative score. Really unique, like you've put a lot of effort in. But your production company has put in your contract that you have to release a sample library afterwards, right? And so you make this amazing soundtrack, and then you have to give everyone the tools that makes it, that makes them able to write exactly what you just did. You know what I mean? Like I can see it being good for composers. I can see it being really shit for the guy who wrote it. You know what I mean? Imagine if after Pirates you got all the Pirates sounds. Can you imagine how piratey the TV bass would sound? Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, because there is there's a buffer, and I think it's like a pre-agreed buffer, right? So a big guy like a John Williams, a Hans Zimmer, whoever, a Danny Elfman, whatever, they'll go write a score. And then there's a buffer, which I feel is like an unwritten but pre-agreed buffer where it takes a few months for it to kind of have its moment, and then for like people to figure out how it's done, and then for people to make libraries that do it. And then maybe a year later, then you start hearing it work its way into everything. Like that happened with Batman, it happened with Inception, it happened with Star Wars, I'm sure. And I feel like if you had to give it away after like the day of the premiere, can you imagine? Can you imagine if we all had the Inception Brams the day of Inception coming out? Can you imagine the soundtrack sphere for the next month? You know what I mean? It would just be nonstop.
Yeah, like it'll be memes for days, wouldn't it?
Memes for days. That is the best phrase of the day. And on that point, Alfie, thank you for calling in today. Memes for days. Is there anything you'd like to say to the chat room before we move on?
Absolutely nothing at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfie, for calling in. Everybody say thank you to Alfie for calling in. So, do we give the sample libraries away with the premiere? Do we what was his first idea? Oh Jesus, how have I forgotten that already? Oh no, independent. Smaller libraries. Smaller libraries. Are smaller libraries the future? Is that how it's going to go? Perhaps we should ask our next caller, Tago. Tago, you are live on stream. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. There's like a 30-second or something delay. So
a 30-second delay from hearing me right now?
No, I mean from the stream.
So while we're talking here, Tago, just mute the stream. We'll have our conversation. You can unmute it afterwards. So Tago, music sampling, is it independent developers? Is it giving away the sample library of the movie as it comes out? Is it algorithms? Is it new recording techniques? What is next for sampling, Tago?
So, I mean, as far as the whole like recording stuff goes, I'd love to see a lot more like weird and just unique instruments.
Right.
Like, I mean, orchestras have sort of been done to death by now. Like everyone and their mom seems like is releasing an orchestral library with
Right.
like 800 horns playing only fortissimo or whatever.
Yep.
But if I just go over here real quick, I have this thing that my dad made. It's called a trumpet. It's a trumpet with a saxophone ligature. Well, it's two trumpets sort of welded together. It sounds like this.
It sounds like a dubstep bass line.
Exactly. It's instrumental dubstep.
So before we continue, you're going to have to sample that for us, Tago, and release it as a library. That'd be great. Okay, continue.
Actually, but, I'd love to see more things like that. But I just kind of wanted to, that was just sort of the first thing off the top of my head.
So you feel like the bigger guys, like the orchestral system is done. Like you feel like we could probably slow that down and start looking into different instruments. Is that what you said?
Yep, exactly.
And what kind of instruments do you feel like we're lacking? I mean, other than like completely inventive instruments, but where do you feel like we're lacking?
Really just like, I think some of the more unique like instruments, even orchestral ones, like, bass flutes and contrabass clarinets and, that sort of thing that you don't really hear very often. Like, I mean, the only libraries that have bass flutes that I've heard are, full woodwinds libraries. And even then, a lot of full woodwinds libraries don't have them because they're pretty rare.
Right.
Also, I just love the bass flute. It's one of my favorite instruments.
Do you feel like more people would use it if it was more sampled, or do you feel like it's just not a very popular instrument in general?
I think more people would use it if it were more sampled. At least I hope so.
Yeah. I feel like to a degree, and perhaps just to like lift off of what you were saying, is perhaps it's the onus is on the developers to create, like, let's say that you create your low flute, like your bass flute library. It's almost on the developer to show, no, this is a cool instrument because, you know what I mean? And then show like
exactly, yeah.
Because no one really uses woodwinds in Epic because there's no real good example of woodwinds being used in Epic other than maybe like some Thomas Bergerson tracks here and there. But you know what I mean? So that's why it doesn't get used a lot, because there's no real good example of it. And the thing is a lot of people who are trying the new things, like all the new experimental things, are the people with nothing to lose, like the newer people. So like Thomas Bergson, yes, he may use woodwinds, but no, he's not going to focus it for a point unless, he's feeling particularly woodwindy that day.
Yeah.
So
he knows what works.
Yeah, he knows what works already, or what his particular taste is. So he's not going to lean in it, like he's not going to lean towards it. I don't particularly use a lot of woodwind, so I don't tend to go in that direction just because, I could probably figure it out. So the onus is on the newer people to figure out how well that works. But they're not going to do that because they're tending to want to get into music because they like, artist X, Y, or Z. And the chances are they don't already use woodwinds because no one's come along and shown how woodwinds are cool yet. So what it is I feel like that's probably another future as well. Would you agree with that? I'm kind of manipulating what you said to create a new answer to it.
But more woodwinds, definitely. I love to see more woodwinds.
But that's what I'm saying. So the next thing for like the new innovation in sampling will be old instruments which are considered not cool or like, rare instruments that people don't use. I feel like the next thing in sampling is showing how to use these in cool ways, Yep. So that would perhaps be an inventive way. What do you think?
Yeah. So something else as far as the whole like storage problem that
Data,
Howard was talking about earlier. So I'm thinking maybe now instead of storing sample libraries on like your computer and downloading it, you just stream the samples from the cloud. Like there's this iPad app. It's a notation software called StaffPad, and it has built into it Spitfire Symphonic Orchestra. It's got Cine Strings libraries in it, and so you pay whatever it is a month, and you can just stream those libraries onto your iPad somehow. No idea how it works, but it does, I guess.
So they're not downloaded at the time.
No.
Interesting. So maybe it reads your MIDI
iPad
file.
doesn't have that kind of storage space.
Yeah, I guess one way you could do it is you could like if you because MIDI data is just data, you know what I mean? It could scan through the MIDI data and just see which samples it actually needs, very
Right.
quickly, and then just load those ones. So that would be the same as like writing a piece of music and then purging all your contact instruments. You know what I mean? You end up only using like a few hundred megs at most. So well, not always, but sometimes, you know what I mean? Because you may have like a 2 gigabyte patch loaded and use one note. So, like it could be, but no, I agree. Like things like that, like the streaming of samples, that could definitely, I mean, particularly now that we've got like 5G coming through, like which is going to be like 2 gigabit speeds over Wi-Fi, like that's, I think that's what it is, right? It's something crazy like that.
Just stupid amount of...
And that is faster than an old network card for Ethernet, right? Isn't an Ethernet a gigabit?
I don't know.
I forget what it is, but I feel like that's bigger than Ethernet. You know what I mean? Like an Ethernet port, or at least the ones that we used to use back in the day. And like the Ethernet is like 100 megabit or so. Ethernet's 10 gigabit. Okay, never mind then. But even then, I feel like I could probably like. What's the sample streaming rate for a hard drive? It's probably a few megabytes a second, right? A few hundred megabytes a second, not few megabytes. But you know what I mean? It's like it can move quick. And what I'm saying is, if the network speed can catch up to the transfer speed of a hard drive, there's no reason you wouldn't just stream everything. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no point storing it at that point.
No point in downloading anything anymore.
Yeah, so 150 megabits per second for mechanical hard drive. So if you've got a 2 gigabit, you're considerably faster than a standard hard drive.
Right.
So I that's actually I didn't even consider that as a possibility. That's a very good idea. I mean, it's working with like video games. Obviously, it's working in movies, because we have Netflix and HBO, and it was an absolute killer. It works with music. I think I think you're actually right. I feel like everything is being offset to the cloud, and it's just taking industries time to get there. Right? That's a very like acute observation. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. And then something else. Just a little. I just want to touch on the whole room thing discussion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, in games, I think it's WWise, the audio engine.
Yeah, WWise. Yep.
WWise. It has built-in convolution, like space convolution. Like in Team Fortress 2, on maps, you can go into a room and it'll put reverb on it.
Right.
So, I mean, games already do that and your computer can run them fine. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, like, that sort of thing ends up coming to samples. I think Vienna already has something like that.
Adaptive convolution?
V Pro, yeah. Like, you can place each output in a room where you want it, and it'll calculate the reflections and stuff.
Oh, okay. So you mean like placing your orchestra in a convolution app kind of thing?
Yeah.
So like the room, you have the room, and then you choose where you. I feel like that already exists. I feel like I've seen something that does that.
It does, but it's not as advanced as I feel like it could be.
Right. So yeah, like this goes along with what someone was saying earlier, is like the physical modeling. I know convolution isn't physical modeling, but imagine you could because like the way convolution works is basically you recording every sample, right? You're attaching reverb to every sample. That's kind of how it works, right? It would be good if they could mathematically do it. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that I want. What would be good is an algorithmic app that could take, let's say, solo instruments or smaller sections, and could work out that they were. So let's say, for example, you had 5 solo strings, right? If you stack them on top of each other and played, it would sound like 5 solo instruments playing together, right? Not 5 players in the same room. What would be great is a reverb plugin that acknowledges the fact there's 5 separate inputs coming in, and then adapts how they would interact with what you're saying is in that placed convolution. Is okay. So imagine it like this, right? This is how I would make it work. So sorry to butt in on your call in time, but
no, you're fine.
So imagine your app, right? Imagine your app is like a box, like a cube. It's a room, right? It's the convolution. If you were to put a single WAV file, like if you put an individual sound in there, so whatever it is, the sound of a section, the sound of a solo instrument, what it should do is it should manipulate the air within your cube in the same way it would in real world. So if there's one instrument, the sound comes out and it bounces back. If you have 2 samples going into that thing, the sound coming out of this, like you have to imagine it like it's just dropping a speaker of that patch in there.
Yeah,
So like,
but it would have to calculate every air molecule in the room
Yeah.
and how it moves around and how
Exactly.
they bounce off each other. That would take a lot of processing.
exactly. But that's what physical modeling is in general,
Right,
and that's what
pretty
I'm saying. Like that's the innovation, that's the technology. Yes, it's hard now, but at one point computers were the size of a fucking building, and now you can
Yeah.
fit like smaller than like a grain of rice. You know what I mean? Like technology's moving. And I feel like that is a thing. So yeah, like I was saying, if you have like each individual patch, let's say you got your string sections, violin, cello, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Imagine them dropping into your little room as individual like speakers. So the sound comes out of that speaker. And what it should do is as the sound comes out, if they interact, it should replicate that turbulence. Don't you think that would be cool?
Yeah, that would be cool.
Like that, I'm accrediting that idea to you because that's kind of where it came from. But yeah,
Okay, sure.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's a good idea. I think you could pull that off. So which do you think is the most important? Which one do you think is more viable out of all of the ideas you put forward? Which do you think is probably the one that's going to happen first, or at all?
Sample streaming, because it's already a thing, and
Right.
it'll be huge for people who don't want to spend a lot of money on really big hard drives
Right.
for samples.
Yeah, for sure.
And then it'll also be because like devs won't have to like have a bunch of servers to download stuff to like send off stuff to downloads, but they will have to maintain servers for streaming, so it'll be more complicated.
Oh yeah, for sure. And dude, and you completely missed, like, you'll be able to literally write scores on iPads, like full scores on iPads and stuff, because then the reason you can't write on an iPad right now is you don't have the memory. You can't load your samples into it. You know what I mean? So you can just get a pen and draw that shit in on your iPad, stream in the samples, and you're done.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm actually with you on that one as well. I think that's probably going to be the most valuable to compose as well. It's like the most evolutionary aspect of all the ideas we've had today. You know what I mean? It's like almost the most obvious one, but it's the one that I feel is probably going to be the most useful and probably will be the only one that gets done.
Yeah. Definitely.
Which company do you think is going to do it best first? Which one do you think is going to get it right first out of all the big guys? Who has technology front and center?
Maybe not get it right, but well, no. Okay, Orchestral Tools is going to be the one to get it right first. But I think Spitfire is going to be the first one to try it.
Right. That's a good prediction.
They already have the Composer Cloud.
I want to put the same question to the chat room. Who do you think will stream first, and who do you think will get it right first? All the big guys. You can use small, but you have to have both. You have to answer both. Who will try first, and who will get it right first? But anyway, Tago, thank you so much for calling in. This has been a fantastic discussion.
It's great. Thank you.
Thank you for calling in. Is there anything you'd like to say to the chat room before we move on?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you, Tago, for calling in. And everybody say thank you to Tago when you get the chance. That was an awesome conversation. So, yeah, plenty to talk about. So now we've got algorithmic rooms. We've got stream sampling. We've got physical modeling. We've got different sample. Sampling has a lot of options. We still have someone in the chat room we haven't asked yet. So we're just going to bring in, before we do though, let's just have a look what the answer to our little question there was. So Spitfire will try first. Orchestral Tools will get it right. Spitfire will try. Cinesamples will get it right. Andrew wants to try again. Yes, you can try again, Andrew, but I'm just going to drag someone else in first. Cinematic Studios get it right first. Cinematic Studios to get it right first. Spitfire to try first. Orchestral Tools. So it feels like everybody's expecting Spitfire to try it first, but fuck it up. And then someone's going to swoop in and then finish and tidy it up. Native Instruments could give it a try. You're right. Yeah, they've definitely got they've got particularly with the Contact Factory library, they have the content. I think Native Instruments would be smart to try it first because they have the content. Could you imagine? Like, I would subscribe to the Complete Ultimate maybe if it was like cheap. You know what I mean? Like something like a Slate Digital. You know what I mean? Like a $10 a month for everything that Native Instruments have. I could see that being value for money. If it was more expensive than that, I don't use it enough. But if it was a cheap one, you know what I mean? Particularly new guys, I could see that being amazing. But anyway, let's drag in our next caller. So we've got DBZ Freak. Can you hear me?
Oh, goodness. I was not prepared for that.
Oh, shit. You weren't ready. But you're live now. It's happening. I hope you're prepared. So DBZ Freak, we've had all sorts. So what is next for sampling? Is it physical modeling? Is it algorithms? Is it streaming? Like, where do you see it going next?
God. I actually wanted to piggyback off of a couple of points.
Sure,
The first
go
one
for it.
being storage that Halvard brought up earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wanted to pair that in line with like computers themselves and like gaming and stuff, because like
Mhm.
over time, since their inception, they've gotten bigger and bigger as time has gone on.
Yeah.
So I honestly expect them to keep growing larger as we get going, and maybe even delving into the making them sound even less MIDI than they are now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're going to record them more deeply, I think is the phrase, right? They're going to record more
Yeah.
layers, more. I mean, but where do you stop with that? Like, and also, where is the point of diminishing returns? At what point is recording another dynamic layer not going to be noticed? You know what I mean?
Good Lord, I think to a point where they can make it sound like actual orchestras,
But-
because like right. I mean, I'm trying to like think of this properly, because
It's fine.
there are tools you can use now to make it sound like as realistic as you can get, but I think
Yep.
there's a point where you can get to you won't be able to tell the difference between a recorded piece by an actual orchestra and MIDI sampling, if that makes sense.
I agree. And but what my question there is and do you think that is because they are not currently sampled deep enough? Do you think that's going to be the thing that tips it over into the world of realism?
I think so, yes.
So
There's got to
you-
be someone out there that's thinking that right now. It's like, how can we go deep? Can we go deeper?
We must
Where are
go
the extra
deeper.
layers?
Must go deeper. No, but you see, like that's the thing, and like I think I disagree with you, but like not aggressively. You know what I mean? Like this is us
Right.
figuring this out together. Like I would, as devil's advocate, I would put it to you perhaps that maybe Spitfire and orchestral tools have already sampled the fuck out of like orchestral instruments. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
they're down to bottle mics. Like I feel like I don't feel like going any deeper will change significantly anything for us as composers. To be fair to you though, I can definitely see deeper being the next step for sampling. I can see them going that direction. It's like, well, now we've recorded 50 dynamic layers and 400 round robins. It's now only 6 terabytes for the library. You know what I mean? I could see that happening, particularly with some of the bigger companies. But I don't know if it'll make it better. So is that what you think it's going to be, or can you see it going in any other direction?
I think that's one of the things I see going.
One of them,
But that's
yeah.
just me just piggybacking off of something earlier.
Yeah.
And then I have another thing I was going to piggyback
Do it.
off of.
Go for it.
I was originally going to bring up the streaming thing but
Yep.
Tago brought it up before me.
That's okay. You can
So,
go down your route with streaming.
Curse you, Tago, for that one. But no, as someone who is, extremely on a budget, as a
Right.
composer right now, I'm relying on East West at the moment, their composer cloud,
Yep.
which has worked out really well for me, I think, thus far at this point. But
Yeah.
then when I started diving into StaffPad, and I found out that they had their streaming service of other sample libraries, that kind of put the bug in my head instantly. So,
Who was that? Sorry,
like-
I missed who you said there.
Oh, sorry. Let me move my headset just a little closer. But StaffPad, the program that
yeah, stuff.
is
Sorry.
on tablets, that they're streaming, Cine samples, orchestral tools and stuff to their program, that kind of put the bug in my head. What's next for that?
Right.
Are other sample companies going to jump on that as well?
Yeah.
And like, how far are they going to go with those samples being able to read the articulations on the fly as you're writing?
Right. Well, that brings in the AI aspect, doesn't it? Like
Exactly.
Yep. So that it's like they're all tying together. DBZ. It's like they're all coming
Yeah.
together. It's like it's as if everything we've said today is all about to like create this moment in time where we get the perfect composing situation, where it's AI driven, it streams in, it algorithmically goes out into the reverb, and it's all physically modeled. And
obviously,
it's only
yeah.
2 megabytes big.
I know, right? But that's not gonna hopefully be the case, because when in doubt, it's like, can we get it bigger?
Yeah. So you see,
Yeah.
like, to you see that's where it's going. So the staff pad is the future. Like the streaming streaming to
I
iPad
think
is the
so.
future. Right. And
Because
like,
if programs like Finale and Sibelius hop on that, then like,
I
that's gonna be-
100% agree with you. Like, particularly for orchestral composers, like specifically orchestral composers, I think we might see a shift back to pen and paper, but like iPad, like not actual pen and
Right.
paper. I could see a resurgence of like music that's in the realm of like John Williams, or you know what I mean, like just more classically musical music.
right.
what we would call musical music. I mean, like, you know, ambiences and textural and hybrid music is still just as musical, but it's not what when we're talking about musical, we're more talking about melodies and harmonies and stuff. You know, a lot of
Rhythms and
modern
so on and
music
so forth.
particularly is textural, you know?
Mhm.
So what
Yeah.
do you think that the composing world will shift to match that? Because I don't see much of a hybrid world in the world of streaming. Like, obviously you can stream it in, but I mean, on the iPad, for example, if you're like, a lot of hybrid is, you know, messing with synths and exploring sounds, you know what I mean? So you'd have to have all the sound there in order to play, you know, like that's the point of them. So you'd have to do that on a computer. I mean, for now, obviously
Right.
technology improves.
I think the two
So,
of them.
so if they move on to these staff pads, you know, like where everybody's composing on the iPad now, what do you think happens to music in general? Do you think it just shifts to become more orchestral, or do you think that like where do you see hybrid or like synthetic music? Do you see that kind of dying out with that new introduction, or do you see
No,
some sort of
actually.
integration?
I think the two of them are going to come together because I like to do things kind of a mildly complicated way. I like to write in Finale first and then do the mixing in Cubase from there.
I know a lot of people that write that way. That's not as rare as you think. Yeah.
So I think that the two of those emerge. Like, I think a composer will write something out in these programs, you know, get the samples from these things, and they'll take it into their audio program and then add the synths and extra textures from there.
Right.
That's what I think is going to happen in the future. Will it be a little more complicated? Probably not, especially if you have those samples already with you. And then you just kind of just move them over. Yep.
Do you think that now is the time, 2020 is the time that we create brand new musical notation for hybrid?
Oh, goodness.
Musical notes that you put on a stave that represent musical, like Bram needs its own musical symbol. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just needs something that you put down and it means everybody just go, you know, or we need something that like indicates towards like synth basses, that indicates toward impacts, that indicates towards like the way that we can manipulate sound, like it's pitch drifting here or distortion. Like, I feel like things like that, words that didn't exist. I mean, obviously distortion, you know, like the concept of it would exist, you know, but I mean, like you going back to the classical era, you know what I mean? They didn't have things like, you know, audio effects and play. I feel like perhaps we need to add those. And then what you can do is you can go back to pen and paper, but still be a modern composer. Do you know what I mean? Like, find a way to bring the new technology of music into the music education system, you know, like, no, it's not an extra. Because I feel like when you go to music school still, you are taught to write music, classical music. You know, you're not trained to be like with all the textures and all the sound design stuff. I feel like that should all come as one, and then sampling should tie them together so that when you end up in your utopian world of the staff that streams everything in, you can put hybrid in there as well. That'd be good. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be kind of cool.
That would be the
Man, that'd be intense though.
Not yet. As someone in chat says, there's not enough Bram in music school. We need more Brahms in music school. Not
Yes,
Brahms.
that's very true.
Brahms.
I mean, from what I was taught, anyways, my composition teacher, he was kind of an advocate of like making your own voice. So I think it depends on who your teacher is at that point for things like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing. I never got to go to music school like to learn composition or anything. So like, I never had my voice adjusted by that. I feel like there's a funny thing that does happen, and this is a little bit off topic, but like a lot of people, when they come out of music school, they have a music school sound. It's hard to explain, but it's the same across the board. It's a very orchestral, classical sound that isn't quite filmic yet. You know what I mean? So usually when people come fresh out of music school, it takes them like 1 or 2 months of being on the job before they can shake off that music school sound. It's just an interesting thing that happens at music school. So I feel like that whoever your teacher is going to seep into your style somewhat regardless. So, you know, you got to keep an eye out for that. You got to keep, but anyway, and the future's all internet based anyway.
That's true, yeah.
Sorry, I'm not out of breath. I'm trying to readjust myself in my seat.
I see it on my other monitor.
Super
I see
excited
it.
by what you said. Let me tell you about the next thing in music. I wasn't getting all excited or anything. Don't worry. But anyway, DBZ, thank you for calling in on this topic. Is there anything you'd like to say to the chat room before we move on?
I wish you all peace, love, and writing great music in the future.
Peace, love, and great music in the future. Thank you so much, DBZ, for calling in. Very, very fun conversation. Thank you. Okay, so we've covered a lot of topics. We've covered a lot of topics. We still do want to bring Andrew in one more time because apparently he fixed his headset. So let's bring him in. Everybody, please say thank you to DBZ before we move on. But we're going to bring in Andrew one final time. Apparently he fixed his headset, and then we could move on to our second topic of the day. So here we go. Hello, Andrew. Are you back? Did you fix your headset?
Hello, I can. Yeah, it's not a thing with the headset. It's Discord being Discord.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, totally. It's totally fine. I had to restart
Fantastic.
my PC and now it's working.
Okay, so I apologize, Andrew. We had to cut you off earlier because obviously there was
No,
like a 30-second delay
no.
between me speaking and you speaking. So if you would like to,
Yes, no
would you
problem.
like to continue with your thought process? So what is next for music sampling, Andrew?
Yeah, first of all, hopefully Cinematic Studio would win.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
But it's already confirmed, so
Uh-huh.
I guess we can be sure on that. But I got Falcon recently, and I'm
Oh, yeah.
super into sample-based sound design. I'm actually right now doing with a friend who's also here on the stream. It's Ali, Crazy Sound,
Uh-huh.
and he can sing really low, like down to a D1 and such. And so we're doing a library with like a sound design library with his samples. And
Yeah.
I think that's what also can be improved, like sound design libraries like Novo, Forzo, the whole Heaviosity stuff.
Mhm.
I think there can be a lot of cool things done for hybrid music.
Right. So do you think that the future of sampling will be taking things that are conventional and then creating something new out of them? So something like a Forzo or a, what was it, Novo that Heaviosity were doing, where they were taking it. You think that's potentially a future?
Yeah, I think you could like do a lot of exploiting the technical stuff you can do, like
And if it was
granular
you,
synthesis.
if it was you, and I'm not like, I'm not trying to steal your ideas or anything. So imagine you've got the budget, right? You record yourself an orchestra. What kind of things would you do with the sounds that you'd recorded? Where would you take them? What would you explore? Doesn't have to be good, but what would you explore?
I would do a lot of granular synthesis, like
Yeah.
chopping them off, or like actually reversing every grain. That's something
Reversing
you can do
every
in
grain.
Falcon. That it's a feature in Falcon, and I
Wow.
love it. It sounds so fucking cool.
How would you describe the sound?
It's you can still hear the same, but I actually tried it with a piano first, and it has this character of a reversed piano, but it's actually forward. It's super crazy.
So it has the character of reverse, but it's going forward.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
feel a bit like.
Yeah, granular synthesis, I think, is definitely, it's the thing with granular synthesis is it's very CPU hungry, and that is definitely one of those things where, as technology advances, I can see it coming through more because obviously I do a lot of my own work with granular synthesis now as technology's improved, but it definitely, like, you have to be sparing, don't you?
Yeah, I mean I loaded in a whole resampled piano, so 88 samples, and for everyone a granular oscillator. It actually worked fine, but if I turn the density of the grains up, it got really CPU heavy.
So you think that like this kind of extra work in granular synthesis, so making granular synthesis more not user friendly, more system friendly would be a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know what it actually will be in the end, and if there's so much to explore. But I think it will be cool to have the possibility to have it work on a weaker system. So.
Yeah, I agree. Like, to me, granular synthesis is such a cool concept. It's just really difficult to use. But the problem is that like granular synthesis only really ever does like pads. You know what I mean? Like it feels like that's all you can ever really get out of it. Can you foresee any?
Actually.
Or like if you were to add an innovation to granular synthesis, what would you want it to be? Would you want it to be more playability so you can play more instruments? Like what would you want it to do beyond just making pads though?
I think you can do. I think it's not only that I want it to be. I think with granular synthesis you could do a lot more than you can do right now. Like pitching each grain differently or something.
Yeah, I
don't know.
I think my favorite, I think it's done with granular synthesis, but my favorite application is there's a plugin called, is it by Zanaptic, called Morph. And what you do is you take two sounds, and then I think what it essentially does is breaks it down into its grains, and then you can cross fade between the two sounds. And so you've created a new sound from the tonal characteristics of two separate ones. Like that, for example, is a good use of granular synth. How about something like that? So perhaps sampling can be creating instruments. I mean, we've already had this, but it was more specifically instruments that didn't exist physically. But I mean, could you see, or like what would you see the future being if we had the ability to cross instruments, cross-pollinate instruments, like a bowed French horn, for example?
I mean,
a French horn that is bowed, like that creates the sound of a French horn, but like with a bowing action instead of a blowing action.
I think it would sound either completely crap or it's the most amazing sound we ever hear.
But do you think that's something they will try, or do you think that's just too out there for the big guys?
If I could, I would definitely try it.
Yeah, I mean, well, someone in the chat room just pointed out a really popular use of it right now. So Mick Gordon, for example, the composer of Doom, he used Morph to merge the sound of a chainsaw with a guitar, which just, you could probably imagine what that sounds like. It's a chainsaw sounding guitar. That is a good cross-pollination. You know what I mean? Because it's the aggression of a chainsaw with the sound of a guitar. So perhaps there's something in that for the future.
Yeah, I think totally that's something possible. I mean, in Falcon, there's also this script processor, and I think someone on GitHub made a library for it where you can where it triggers MIDI notes, so it creates like a really pad kind of sound. And I think then again with AI, you could also do like stuff that it takes. I mean, AI usually works with breaking things into like different values.
Right.
And I think if you can say, I take dead values of the one sound and the other ones of the other, and then morph them back into each other, would sound really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I could definitely see some of the big guys going for that. The only problem is it sounds almost too niche. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like it would be really cool, and I bet it would work. But like it's one of those, who's going to try it? I could see.
Yeah.
Who could I see try? I could see ADO trying it.
Yeah, probably.
Out of all of the people.
I actually want to do a lot of stuff with Falcon now, and I hope that I can do some stuff that's like not out there yet.
Mate,
So
when you
I'll
do
see.
it, let us know. Post it in the chat room or in the Discord, and we'll check it out.
Yeah, I definitely will post it in the Discord.
All right. Well, thank you so much for calling in again, Andrew, and thank you for fixing your headset. This was much easier.
Yeah, it totally was.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the chat room? You didn't get an opportunity last time.
Thank you for having me, and good night to everyone. We might talk again.
So wholesome. Thank you so much, Andrew, for calling in.
Thank you for letting me.
Okay. And so that will probably conclude the discussion on what's next for sampling. I did have, let me fill you in on my new fantastic idea that was inspired by Andrew there. I'm going to start a service, right? What it's going to be is I'm going to set up a room that has a violin, a cello, and then they're all going to be controlled by robots, right? And then what you do is you submit your MIDI file, right? You submit your MIDI file, and the MIDI file is applied to these live robots that are sitting in a recording studio somewhere, and then you watch as they record what your MIDI file is, and then the next person submits theirs, and so they are just these musical slaves that day in, day out are being fed MIDI information and just being paid. They're not being paid. You put the MIDI and they're just consistently playing music day in, day out in a natural environment. Oh, Boston Dynamics has entered the chat. Fantastic. But anyway, so yeah, what do you guys, the chat room? I saw that you've been discussing this topic, but obviously I've been discussing, so I haven't been able to read. So let me just read back through the chat room. Simon Vickland put regarding whether sample library creators need to sample deeper or if there's something else missing in current sample libraries. Before composers can create music that doesn't sound MIDI, I believe we're already there. The tools are already here. You just need to know how to use them. For example, listen to Andy Blaney's Kraken, one of the demos used to demo Spitfire's symphonic orchestra. It was indeed a very good demo. And I think the point is, yes, you can create realistic demos already, but it's a lot of effort to get there. I mean, it doesn't come naturally. Like it's not the default outcome when you compose with samples. The default outcome isn't real. I mean, just go listen to like some of the what would you call them? The mock-ups by like someone great like John Powell, right? Go listen to John Powell's MIDI samples. They still sound like MIDI, and I don't think John is a bad composer, which means that composing isn't the skill for making it sound real, which is unfortunate. Like, it'd be great if composing was the thing that made it sound good, but it's a completely different set of skills to make samples sound real, and usually it's not actually important. So samples is a weird thing because it existed for a long time as a mock-up tool. It kind of went weird. It was like samples were used. I mean, samples have always kind of been used in some level of production along the, you know what I mean? Like when Hans was doing like Rain Man and stuff, you know what I mean? There's still some sampled stuff going on there for sure, you know? So samples have been around for a long time, but it was a while where samples were like being used, but you weren't using sampled orchestra because it sounded like a Casio keyboard, but you were using like sampled marimba and shit like that. And then we had sample libraries, and then what sample libraries were used for were mock-ups. They were used to show a director what music was gonna sound like when it was done and give you an idea of what it will sound like on the scoring stage, so they knew what the music was before it was recorded. Because the worst thing that would happen is they would get to the scoring stage having never heard the actual music before other than maybe on a piano, and then hearing it with all the orchestration and being like, this kind of sounds shit. And then you'd have to, on the scoring stage, rewrite something else. You know. So you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be doing that. Anyway, I was about to go off on a whole tirade down a thing. But anyway, we should probably cut back off. Wait, where was that? Indeed, it takes a lot of effort. You need the knowledge and composition, orchestration. Well, that's what I mean. Like, if back on the previous point is that like because they were used as mock-ups, you know what I mean, like there was no need to get good at it. But then in the early 2000s, this is where I was going with it, so I'm going down it now because the next question was on that path anyway. So like in the early 2000s, samples started to sound pretty decent, right? And then as they started to sound more decent, they became more acceptable to be used as final product. And as soon as samples were considered good enough to be final product, all of a sudden it became important to learn how to make them sound good. And that's about the time when I started. You know what I mean? So like I feel kind of lucky because I started my career around the time when samples were like, okay, now samples are final quality. So, you know what I mean? I kind of got to figure it out along with the big guys figuring it out. You know what I mean? Like, obviously I didn't, you know, I had nothing to do with samples sounding good. That's not what I'm trying to claim. I'm trying to say that, like, as I started as I became a composer, you know, scores like Gladiator were popular, you know, ones where they were doing hybrid. They were mixing in samples with live orchestra and stuff. And so, and like one of the scores that started around when I was like Metal Gear Solid 2, for example. A lot of that is sampled score. And it sounded real, you know what I mean? And so everybody was trying to figure out how to get it to sound like realistic. And so I started in the industry when these good libraries were just starting to come out. So I didn't have, and this, you know, if it wasn't me, it would have been someone else. But like, so I didn't have the baggage of how it went before. I didn't have the baggage of being restricted before I was unrestricted. You see, because if you were restricted to the orchestra and then hybrid comes along and you're unrestricted, you're going to slowly integrate parts of that into your sound because you have a sound that works. Why would you change it? You know, you're a 90s composer, you've got this great orchestral sound. Say you're like not John Williams, but you write in that style, you know, very orchestral, pen and paper. As you get into the 2000s and, you know, contacts around and hybrid and mock-ups, you know, like you're going to have to start getting involved in these kind of things, but you're going to introduce them into your workflow slowly because you have things that work and you get hired for. Whereas people like me started with samples, you know what I mean? Like that's how we started. And so I'm happy to just use everything, like hybrid. I start hybrid and then introduce orchestral bit by bit. So it was people like me and people along like that kind of, not me specifically, but I mean like that kind of generational composer, the people who started with hybrid, we sort of helped define what sample libraries are and what they do, because for us, they are final product. So, you see people like me complaining in ways that people who are orchestral composers don't complain. Usually it comes down to people saying that I'm saying it's not epic enough, or it's not big enough, or it's not ballsy enough. And to the older people, not older, I mean like the more classical people, or the more orchestral, orchestral writing people, don't think about music in the same way, because I came in hybrid first. So that kind of world built, it built up. So being like making things sound final result with samples was always the forefront. And that's what usually differentiates a good library to a bad library to me. So when I say something sounds good or it's a good library, it's because it's allowing me to sound final result easier towards the end of the product. There was nothing wrong with Garatan. There was nothing wrong with the Edirol Orchestra. They just didn't sound particularly final quality. They were great enough to write with, but you know what I mean? They weren't end quality. So when I'm talking about what is a good sample library and what is a bad sound library these days, it may not be what's a good sound library and a bad sound library for someone who is orchestral first, because they may be looking at, I need the most amount of articulations. I don't care how good or bad they sound, because they're not final quality. I just need the most articulations. Where to me, it's like, I'm okay with fewer articulations if what I have sounds real and sounds incredible. Does that sound fair? The medium dictating the writing style, interesting case. Yes, I think that's what it is. Because again, people like me who started writing with sample libraries, like we got into the industry when sample libraries was figuring out what it is. Sample libraries now are more about end result than they are about how easy or how useful they are to use. They're more about how good they make your end result, which is perfect. But I feel like we're almost hitting a limit with that. Like, obviously we're not real yet, but once we figure out that like final 0.1% of making it sound real, then it needs to shift to playability. Then it needs to shift to making it so it's easy for me to play. We already have companies doing that, like Performance Samples, for example, who will put out a patch, which is one instrument that does one thing, but it does that one thing perfectly. Like Oceana Choir, for example. If you want that big chanty choir, it's perfect. It's down that route. It sounds great, sounds real, plays well, fits. That's what the future, I think, is going to be. Like, if we're coming down to conclusions on a topic, my conclusion is that it's going to come down to playability. Like, the music industry will pivot, because I feel like end result is almost there. I feel like amateurs, like people who are just walking into music production, can create some results which would be studio quality in like the 90s, like it easily. I'm not saying they can't do something with them now that sounds good now, but I'm saying that out of the box, you're getting like 90s decent, which is great. With a little bit of effort, you're straight up to modern day. But now we just need that playability, something that makes it fun, something that makes, like, the two recent instruments which I like in this regard, to this regard, is, what's it called? There's Thrill by Native Instruments, and the other Galaxy Instruments one is Mysteria. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Mysteria. The reason I like these instruments is because they focus on a musical aspect. They're aleatoric, which means, like you play whatever, you play randomly within a set of rules, right? But the reason I like these so much is they feel like an instrument. If you were in front of an orchestra, I don't know why I said it like that. If you're in front of an orchestra and you're doing aleatoric, you would direct them. You would make them flow between different types of rule set, and you would make them get louder, you make them get quiet. That's how the instrument plays. It's very playable. When you play something like Oceana, you hit the notes, you get the response. There are some libraries which sound great, particularly like Spitfire ones, where when I commented on they don't sound great when you play them, the response was you have to learn them. So that's a different approach. It's like, sure, you can make them sound great, but they won't sound amazing out the box, but they might get you closer if you put in the effort. So they do weigh up, and I'm wanting to see those two different approaches come together in a unified approach that works best for everybody. So it sounds real, like a Performance Samples, or it's playable like a performance samples, but it sounds great like a Spitfire or an orchestral tools. You know what I mean? Somewhere along those lines. So that's my conclusion. I don't know what you guys thinking. That was over an hour discussion. So we're actually going to end this TADay show here. And then we're going to, so if you're watching this on YouTube, this is where this discussion on what is next for sampling is going to end. That way we can keep it relatively short, because if there's one thing I've noticed on analytics, it's that people watch my 3-hour videos for about 6 minutes. So, the shorter they are, the more chance they're going to find something useful. So we're going to end this TADay show here. If you're watching on Twitch, do not go anywhere, because we're going to continue afterwards. But if you're watching this on YouTube, this is where this show is going to end. So big thank you to everybody who called in today and offered their opinions on what's next for sampling. I think this is actually quite a fun discussion, because it's actually got me quite inspired. But if you're watching this on YouTube, this is where this one's going to end. Thank you for watching today. Make sure to hit subscribe and the bell button down below. Something else as well, I'll get into that on the Twitch stream. But if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.